mistakes of his predecessors and lead a government marked by integrity, professionalism and accountability in his first address to the nation as Prime Minister. Speaking in Downing Street after being formally invited to form a government by the King, he paid tribute to both Liz Truss and Boris Johnson and said that the mandate earned at the 2019 general election belonged to the Conservative Party rather than any individual. From Westminster, here's our political correspondent Ben Wright.
The new Prime Minister waved from the steps of number 10, but resisted a smile. And Rishi Sunak's solemn manner reflected the contents of his speech. He said the country faced a profound economic crisis and apologised for the mistakes of his predecessor. Mr. Sunak said restoring stability and confidence would involve difficult decisions, but promised to govern compassionately. Elevated into office by Tory MPs, Mr. Sunak insisted his mandate to lead came from the party's election-winning manifesto. 2 Conservative Prime Ministers have been ejected since 2019, and Mr. Sunak said he would work to restore trust after all that had happened, promising to put the country's needs above politics. The King appointed his first Prime Minister after accepting the resignation of Liz Truss at Buckingham Palace. The UK's shortest-serving Prime Minister made a brief final speech in Downing Street in which she defiantly stressed the need for government to take bold, difficult decisions. There was no acknowledgement or apology for the turmoil triggered by her government's mini-budget, the legacy of which Rishi Sunak now inherits.
Some news just in. Jacob Rees-Mogg has resigned as Business Secretary as the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, starts putting together his cabinet. Mr. Rees-Mogg is one of Boris Johnson's most loyal supporters. Mr. Sunak said economic stability and confidence would be at the heart of his government. The Bank of England has warned of recession, while the Office for National Statistics found nearly half of adults struggled to pay energy bills over the summer. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson reports.
Rishi Sunak faced a tricky time as Chancellor, trying to steer the economy through the pandemic. What he faces now is just as difficult, but very different. Inflation is at a 40-year high. Interest rates are rising to try to tame it, and the economy is sliding towards recession. Mr. Sunak must show how he'll keep borrowing under control to restore the UK's financial credibility. That means difficult choices. Tax rises, spending cuts, or both. But he's also under pressure to support people through soaring prices and the biggest hit to household incomes since the 50s. New data from the Office for National Statistics shows that the cost of the cheapest supermarket groceries have risen 17% in the year to September.
The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said that rebuilding Ukraine is a generational task that must start immediately, even as Russia's invasion continues. He was speaking at a major international conference in Berlin on the reconstruction of Ukraine. Our correspondent Jenny Hill reports from the German capital.
The scale of destruction in Ukraine was described as staggering by the President of the EU Commission. Ursula von der Leyen said that emergency reconstruction must begin now. It's widely acknowledged that Vladimir Putin has shifted tactics, targeting civilian infrastructure such as energy and water supplies ahead of the winter. Addressing the conference by video, Ukraine's President Zelensky said Russia had destroyed more than a third of his country's energy sector. Even as fighting continues, thoughts are turning to the longer-term future. The World Bank estimates it'll cost more than £300 billion to rebuild the country once the war ends. The German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, has called for international governments and donors to come together to fund such a programme.
2 men have been killed and a third has been left seriously injured in a shooting in East London, which happened shortly after midnight. Police were called to a street in Ilford after reports of a fight with shots being fired. One man in his 20s was pronounced dead at the scene. A second man died a short time later. A third man in his 30s remains in a critical condition. There have been no arrests so far. 6 Palestinians, including several militants, have been killed by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank. 5 of them died during a raid in the city of Nablus. Israel says it acted after the killing of a soldier this month. Palestinian leaders have described the mounting raids as war crimes. Here's our Middle East correspondent Tom Bateman.
Israeli jeeps and armoured troop carriers raided Nablus as Palestinians called via loudspeakers for locals to come out and defend the city. Young men poured into the streets. There were massive exchanges of gunfire between soldiers and gunmen in one of the most severe escalations of violence this year. The army says its forces blew up an explosives factory and militant base. Local reports say troops fired an anti-tank missile at the building. Among the militants killed was a senior commander and founder of the Lion's Den, a recently formed militant group leading to Palestinian calls for a further day of clashes with troops. Medical workers said another Palestinian was shot dead by Israeli troops in a West Bank village as people reportedly threw stones in protest at the raids.
The messaging service WhatsApp is back online after it stopped working for about 2 hours this morning. Thousands of people in the UK and around the world reported on other forms of social media that they were unable to send or receive messages. WhatsApp, which is owned by Meta, has not yet given a reason for the service outage. The UK has been experiencing a partial solar eclipse. The Royal Astronomical Society said the eclipse, when the moon moved between the Earth and the Sun, was visible across the country from 10 this morning till about midday. The best view was in Lerwick in the Shetland Isles, where 28% of the sun was obscured at mid-eclipse.
Jane, thanks very much. Well, it was just over an hour ago at midday that Rishi Sunak entered the doors of number 10 for the first time as Prime Minister. There was hardly a smile as he waved from the doorstep. And he didn't stay long behind those famous black doors. He's now in the Commons, where we understand he will begin his reshuffle with the most brutal aspect, the sacking of current ministers. And just before we came on air, we learned Jacob Rees-Mogg had resigned as a business secretary. We also understand Brandon Lewis has also gone. But as we get any information, we'll return to it throughout the programme. But we'll start with how the day began. At 9 o'clock this morning, Rishi Sunak's predecessor, Liz Truss, held her last cabinet meeting. And it was just over an hour later that our shortest serving Prime Minister gave her last address to the nation from Downing Street. It was a speech in which she defended her legacy of trying to push through tax cuts.
We simply cannot afford to be a low-growth country where the government takes up an increasing share of our national wealth and where there are huge divides between different parts of our country. We need to take advantage of our Brexit freedoms to do things differently. This means delivering more freedom for our own citizens and restoring power to democratic institutions. It means lower taxes so people can keep more of the money that they earn. And it means delivering growth that will lead to more job security, higher wages, and greater opportunities for our children and grandchildren. Our country continues to battle through a storm. But I believe in Britain. I believe in the British people. And I know that brighter days lie ahead. Thank you.
Well, Miss Truss then made her way to Buckingham Palace to hand in her resignation to the King. And it was about that time that the helicopter cameras showed a moving van outside the back door of Downing Street. It was only about half an hour later that her successor, Rishi Sunak, arrived at the palace. Now, it's a bit of constitutional choreography we've become familiar with. What we understand typically happens is the King would have asked him whether he has the confidence of the House of Commons, to which we presume the answer was yes. And then the youngest Prime Minister in 200 years, first British Asian to hold the post, headed back to Downing Street. Liz Truss's lectern with its pedestal of twisted blocks had been removed. The man in charge of these things has been seen in Downing Street so often recently that he's become known on social media as Hot Lectern Guy. He emerged with a new, simpler version for Rishi Sunak. The leadership contest had been so quick that he hasn't had a chance to choose his own yet, which is expected of Prime Minister. But it was from there that the new Prime Minister gave his first address and said it was only right that he should explain why he was there.
Right now, our country is facing a profound economic crisis. The aftermath of COVID still lingers. Putin's war in Ukraine has destabilized energy